Hey Nikhil, welcome to day 1000.
Hi, Kavan. Hi. Thank you.
Lovely having you here. You've been building your startup for several years now, so you're well past the 0 to 1 phase. I also saw that you raised a $5 million plus round recently, so congratulations to you and your team for that.
Thank you.
A lot of people would love to build in your space, raise venture capital, and essentially chase their dreams. But often, what happens in their journey is there are a lot of hurdles which come, getting customers, deciding budgets, and whatnot. And as a young company, only entrepreneurs know how hard it is to actually take it from 0 to 1. So, would love to unpack a bunch of these insights and stories from you. But before all of that, why don't you quickly introduce us to yourself and even what your company does?
Sure. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me on day 1000. I think when we talk about India growing as a nation, right, we need more entrepreneurs coming from from our country, right? And that is being powered by content creators like you is what I feel, who talk on the right topics. And I think day 1000 is perfect along those lines, that those are the formative years for any company, right? No one really talks about those first 3 years, so to speak, and that is where cultures get shaped, your company structures get built, and eventually turns into large organizations. So kudos to the Indiefolio team and you, Kavan, for bringing up this initiative. Glad to be part of it. Yeah. So, and talking about myself, I am Nikhil. I am the co-founder at ElecBits. So ElecBits is a B2B enterprise organization that helps electronics enterprise companies to go from ideation to mass manufacturing in the most simpler, faster, and a scalable manner. So that's a brief sum up about a description about our company. But to give you a brief context about the industry that we operate in, right? So if you take a look at the room that you're sitting in currently, you must be currently surrounded by more than hundreds of devices around you that have electricity running through those, right? So not just that, but the car that you travel in, the phone that you use, the TV that you watch, the planes that we travel in. So everything is being powered by that green colored board, which people typically call the motherboard. It's not actually a motherboard. It's actually a printed circuit board. We call it the PCB. And that PCB is powering the modern day world, whether it is consumer electronics, whether it is aerospace, whether it is defense, whether it is automotive, EVs, telecom, anything. So that's the backbone of everything. So we operate in this industry and we help customers of ours to go from ideation to prototyping to low volume manufacturing to mass volume manufacturing in the most simpler, faster, and a scalable manner. So yes, that's what we are building here at ElecBits.
Lovely, lovely. Very, very important, right? As a space, I think a lot of people don't understand the general impacts things like the PCB has and how getting a lot of these companies which literally run our infra to be much more optimized. I think it's such a win-win for everybody involved in that. So, I want to jump into the first question itself, which is your first customers, right? How do you get them? Now, ads, brand is a lot of things people hear. And people operating in B2B and enterprise always find it very confusing and unhelpful. Ki yaar, an ad's now going to convince a decision making committee to,
Right.
say yes to my service. In B2B and enterprise, it's a full trust game, a reputation game. So you're doing something so integrated for these large companies. Tell me about your first few customers. What channels did you employ and how did you get these customers?
Right. So we formally incorporated the company in 19, I think, but we have been in this electronics industry or the electronics space for almost 10 to 12 years now. But the journey that started for us really started up from love for electronics in general, right? Throughout our college days, me and my co-founder Saurav were in the electronics lab tinkering around with circuit boards, development boards, and that's how really we fell in love with electronics and building products in general. So throughout the initial 3 to 4 years before being formally incorporated, we were always building products, right? And that is what we did every single day. So in a span of 2 to 3 years, we had developed more than 300 to 400 odd products, and these were smart devices, IoT related products, some cool gadget or some cool product that you see. So we are always building that. And what we felt that was we have a lot of like-minded engineers like us who want to build a career in the electronics domain. So what we did was we bought a domain called elecbits.in. Back in, I still remember it costed us almost 1600 rupees to buy that domain. That was a huge amount of money to gather while we were still in college. But we bought that domain. So all of these products that we were building, so there are a lot of files related to each product that you build, development files. For example, the firmware files, the hardware files, the testing structures, the sheets, all the process to build an entire hardware and integrate it and give it life. So we put that all together and we uploaded it on this domain that we bought. And we had an active repository of more than 400 products that we built over a span of 2 to 3 years. That really acted like our channel of customer acquisition. That's a completely unconventional way. We didn't know that it will generate good quality customers for us someday. But that is how it really started. Buying a domain, putting up all the knowledge that you have over the past few years, just putting it out there for the open source community to come learn from it. And that's how we started getting a lot of traction from very good customers that we actually wanted to get. So the first customer that I'd like to tell you about was Maruti Suzuki. Right. So the brand in itself to get as a customer is very tough because Maruti is known to be a very tough customer when it comes to onboarding any new vendor or a partner on board. But since we went through this unconventional route of mostly, I'll call it consultative or an educational based selling, we got a very good inroad into Maruti. So I got a call one day from the NPD head of Maruti, Mr. Rahul, in 2018. And he said that, hey, I was just Googling IoT based product development and I came across your website and you guys seem to be doing some awesome stuff, building hardware products. And we need that kind of speed and agility into our processes as well. How about a quick meeting? So our office was
Wow.
in DLF phase to Gurgaon, and Maruti, as you must be knowing, that they based out of Udyog Vihar itself. That's like 5 minutes from Gurgaon. So within the next half an hour, we were sitting in front of him in the NPD division of Maruti Suzuki, and that's how really we got our first major customer that ideally we would have taken years to crack. But yeah, that's a very interesting story that really we had with getting Maruti.
Lovely.
And Maruti was the first one. Particularly, I like to quote about Paytm. So Paytm, of course, we know the giant fintech organization that Paytm is, and they were the first ones to bring that digital payment soundbox with a QR that you see in almost every nook and corner and every shop across India. They were really the first one to really imagine it and scale it across India. And to tell you, ElecBits was one of the first two organizations that they reached out to develop that product. And this I'm talking about in 2017.
Lovely.
So yes, these two stories were very interesting, very unconventional form of customer acquisition, but that worked for us, and we are still continuing along that path and really doubling down on this way of getting a customer. Yeah,
Superb, superb. I think my takeaway is that when you don't have a lot of budgets to get customers or relationships to get customers, build capacity. I think if you're able to build a proof of work, build capacity, get endorsements on what you do works, that can be, leveraged when the timing is right. And I think you did a good job of putting it out there. So it kind of got crawled by all these search engines. And when the right person was searching for it, you kind of came up. So
absolutely.
I think that's the biggest takeaway, for everybody out there. I want to, however, understand from you while getting customers in B2B, everybody says it's a very relationship driven game. Does that mean we need to hire senior people in the market eventually to crack these relationships? Or how does one leverage relationships to do sales, if I was an enterprise founder?
Right. Very interesting. And I think a question that often B2B founders grapple a lot with while building their sales force and building their initial sales numbers. And what we have figured out is that, see, of course, trust and relationship is extremely, extremely important to win the other person's confidence. So the way that we have really developed our strength and capabilities around is doing educational and consultative based selling. Right. So whenever we sit in front of a prospect customer, right, the depthness and the clarity with which we are able to explain the entire process of electronics engineering and electronics manufacturing, that acts like a very good trust builder is what we have figured out. Because how electronics works, right, if you are able to explain that to you customer in simple terms, they gain a lot of trust and they know that the other person sitting on the other side of the table knows what they are doing. And that has really worked for us, whether it is working with Maruti, whether it is working with Schneider Electric, with Panasonic, with Bosch. I think the clarity with which we are able to convey to them our knowledge of the entire process of electronics, whether it is engineering or manufacturing, that helps build a lot of trust in the prospect customers. And that is what we double down into. And the kind of sales team also we are building, we do very extensive in-depth orientation which spans almost 6 months, which helps them know the nitty-gritties of when a product gets developed, what are the things that can go right, what are the things that go wrong, how do you fix that, how do you keep those things in mind. There are thousands such documentations that we have prepared so that when the salesperson goes on the field, he'll be very well equipped mentally to answer the questions, number one, and number two, explain the process in greater depth and detail. So I think, yes, that's really worked for us.
No, I think fantastic, right? I think taking that approach to educate your customer and not sell them works
Yeah,
very well. And
yeah.
if you feel that you can't educate your customer, then your product's not strong enough. So fully, vouch that. So Nikhil, I want to now jump into spends which a lot of founders end up regretting. I've not met a single founder who doesn't regret some spends they made in their first 1,000 days, right? You have these thesis and
Mm.
examples on YouTube or wherever ki, yeah, we should do these things. But it's only by learning and acting upon them is when you figure out, ki, yeah, okay, for me, for my context, it doesn't work out. So could you kind of share a few spends you regret?
So the first 1,000 days for us as an organization, so completely bootstrapped. We were bootstrapped for the first 4 to 5 years of our existence. And what that does is
Lovely.
that it's a lot of financial prudence. It gets hardwired, right? Because when the money comes, what we went through, right? We know the hard days when there was absolutely no money in the bank and you have to process a payroll the next day. So the first 1,000 days coming from a bootstrapped environment where money, even 2,000 rupees was a luxury, right? So I won't say we were not able to spend something much freely in terms of anything that we wanted to build. So the first 1,000 days, I think, were very, very, very different. No such spends that we regret in those days because hardly any money was there which was left lying there for us to spend, right? So that was then. But I'll talk about the current day scenario when we are a funded organization and we have got venture capitals on board. Those hard days really taught us to be financially prudent and be very frugal in terms of whatever you spend. And the kind of leadership team that we are also bringing on board, one very strong cultural parameter that we measure is the sense of frugality at its very core. And we are very fortunate enough to have those senior people on board now who have a sense of frugality in them. And that essentially trickles down in the entire organization. But yes, during the first 1,000 days, not much of regrets in terms of spending because there's hardly any money to spend. But now, current day, I think very, very important to be financially frugal, have that drilled down into your entire organization, have very strong financial controls. So that's very important.
No, I think being frugal in the start really builds that habit. I've
Yes.
seen that with people who bootstrap versus people who initially raise a large seed capital. But seeing how the landscape has been after analyzing it for 15 years, I think frugality is always the answer.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, you have to turn a profit and keep the light on. If you can't
Right.
do that, then there's no point of whatever billions you've raised.
Of course.
So I think valuable advice there. I want to now ask you the last part, right, which is underrated and overrated channels. Once again, repeating what I mentioned earlier on in enterprise, those channels sometimes can be a blur because very less conversations happen around enterprise client acquisition. Right?
Hmm.
Could you, so you obviously mentioned your portfolio, your work is a great way. Could you maybe give another channel in enterprise sales which has worked very well for you and one which you think is overrated and you don't recommend it?
Right, right, right. So when it comes to underrated channels of approaching your sales, I think founder-led sales is one of the most underrated things that a lot of founders do not leverage, right? Because and we at ElecBits, me and Saurav have learned it, and we are really maximizing that a lot, right? So I frequently post on LinkedIn, and till the current day, I'll say that almost 70 to 80% of the business that we do in terms of the customers that we get 80% of that comes through organic LinkedIn posting that me and Saurabh do. That's one thing that has worked perfectly for us. And of course, educating the customer is one part. But number two is building that thought leadership for the industry to see. That's very important. And that's where we really post out regular content in terms of how we envision the industry. What thoughts do we have about the industry? How can India become a global electronics hub? So I regularly post my thoughts on that, and that really makes prospect customers believe that, hey, they know what they're doing and we like to associate with them. So even last week, very senior engineering person from Tesla reached out to me by watching one of my LinkedIn posts, just reading through it. Imagine getting in touch with someone from Tesla. So that's how I will advise people that leverage your identity, your brand, create your brand, invest heavily in that, and have that thought leadership so that the industry people can really see you and start noticing you. So yes, of course, founder-led sales is very underrated. I think many founders need to really double down on that. And of course, second was consultative and education-based selling, which has worked for us. So yeah, these 2 pointers when it comes to underrated. When it comes to overrated, I will say the first one will be performance marketing in B2B. I don't really get the sense of how does that work because I have not seen that work for us. You're doing paid ads and all of that thing, but hasn't really worked for us. So I think it needs to be very organic. It needs to flow from the founders and ultimately in the senior leadership team as well. That will be much more long term and organic way of acquiring a new customer. So that's one. And second, say getting very, very senior people from the industry in your sales team when you are in a growth phase, when you are in a hyper growth phase. I'll say when you are from 0 to 1 or maybe on the initial end of the 1 to 10 journey, getting super experienced people on board. You need to be very careful with that. And you need to be very cautious in terms of what kind of culture fitment there is, how will they gel in with the existing people or the existing team who have built this entire thing. Do they go above and beyond in terms of building this organization? So this is the second pointer that I'll say, that founders need to be very, very careful while onboarding a very senior person from the industry.
Lovely. I think bang on, right, with all these points. I would put the, sales people also under a spend you may have regretted based on your answer, because I often see that in enterprise where, it's the people you end up spending a lot on who don't show up, right? The way you thought they would, just because they are better, quote unquote. One follow up on this one piece was the founder piece, right? I also fully believe in that. In fact, I do this for Indiefolio day in and day out, and I've seen how important it is. But many founders I speak to cringe at it. They're like, no, yeah, I'm not somebody who can, put myself out there. I'm not
Yeah.
somebody who likes to do sales. Um, is what's your, suggestion to folks like that? Do they need to delegate this, or do they need to really like, embrace the cringe and execute?
See, I think as founders, you're selling every single day, right? You're selling to prospect customers, you're selling to your suppliers, you're selling to your investors, you're selling your vision to your team members. Even at times, you're selling to your family members. That's how you do that friends and family round, right? You sell to your family members that, hey, I have this vision, I have to build this. If you as a founder are not a salesperson or do not want to do sales, I think you need to think a lot about it. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair point, very real that you understand the category and what it takes. And in enterprise, the fact that somebody can actually work with the founder is a differentiator. A lot of
Hmm.
preference comes from there, because when enterprise is used to dealing with another enterprise, the kind of people who you end up getting from a vendors are probably not as good as a founder of a smaller company. Customers recognize that part. So you should use it to your advantage. I constantly recommend that.
Of course.
Fantastic. No, thank you so much, Nikhil. I think we've covered some great insights here. As a parting thought, I have one last question for you. The hardest thing, right, about uh, the first 1,000 days is getting through that. You've built a company without raising a single external penny, right? You just said. What's your advice to people today? Maybe they are like, pulling their hair out. It's not looking very positive. It's one of those times when you ask yourself, is it really worth it, right? For anybody in that phase, how do you really get through the first 1,000 days?
Right. So very good question. I think I have a couple of thoughts on that question. Like, so what we feel is that the first 1,000 years are the hardest, right? And so what we typically, when we talk to fellow team members or fellow founders as well, I typically ask them that for how long are you in this thing? If the answer is anything less than 10 years, I'm like, really think about this thing, because if you are trying to build a startup and you're not ready to invest a minimum of 10 years of your life towards building that, then you should probably do something else. So grit and rigor during those first 1,000 days is, I think, the most important. You have to keep going at it. The situation might be or might not be in your favor. It will not be in your favor for more than 60-70% of the times, right? But that's the kind of training and the mindset or the founder mindset that you need to build in the first 1,000 days. And it's almost like a sine curve, but that sine curve is growing upwards. That's the good part about it. And you should have that energy and that mental strength to go through those sine curves, because ultimately it'll go up. That's not an issue. In the broader perspective, you're growing as an individual, but that mental strength should be built day in, day out. That is what will make you last very, very long as a founder and build something very, very large as an organization that will outgrow you and outlast you, is what we feel. Yeah, so the first 1,000 days are not glamorous, not at all glamorous. They are hardcore survival. If you are able to survive, chances of you surviving in the next 1,000 days increases a lot. So that's what I feel.
Lovely, lovely. I think a good comparison here is that you know if you're signing up for a marathon, it's 42 kilometers. So if it's
Yeah.
just been 10, 15 kilometers, you cannot like be sad about it. I think what happens is people pulling their hair out are the ones who thought there will be early success, there will be more freedom, there will be
Hmm.
more relaxed times because I'm not reporting to any boss. But you soon realize, reporting to yourself is the worst and your customers is the worst because it
Yeah.
all kind of comes down on your shoulders. And while you've got control, which gives you freedom, you often drop that freedom on a daily basis for the
Yes.
greater good, right?
And one
So,
interesting
so
thing that I'll like to share with fellow founders will be that have a co-founder. A single founder running a startup will get extremely tough, I'll tell you. And hence having a co-founder with whom you have a very good relationship with is ultimately the bedrock of the kind of organization that you'll build. So I'll advise go find yourself a startup co-founder because it's a long journey, it's an arduous one, it's a very tough one, but at the same time it's very rewarding.
lovely. Again, very, very important point, which, you soon realize several years into your
Yeah.
journey that, wow, imagine it if I was all alone. Any which ways, leadership is lonely. And,
Hmm.
if you're taking calls yourself and suffering through the whole journey yourself, like it's just not very good for your mind. So yeah, agreed there, Nikhil. Thank you so much. I think some incredible insights here for fellow founders. And thank you so much, Nikhil. It was a pleasure having you. If you, by the way, are an audience member and you stuck till the end, please subscribe to our channels if you'd like another founder like Nikhil come on this soon. Thank you so much and bye bye, Nikhil.
Thank you, Gavan. Thank you so much.